Look closely at any patch of wilderness, and you'll find an intricate mechanical system operating in plain sight. Every single creeping vine, darting lizard, and shifting shadow follows a set of rules waiting to be uncovered. 10-year-old Janavi spent her days cataloging these exact mysteries. She was building an exhaustive mental ledger of questions: why spiders camouflage perfectly inside yellow flowers, the acoustic physics of rustling bamboo, and how the water in the rice fields manages to turn fish into frogs. But her intellectual appetite was confined by her daily routine. While her older brother Gopi and sister Meena left for the classroom, Jahnavi was anchored to the house, tasked with carrying and quieting her infant brother Apu. When she asked to learn, the answer was a moving target: maybe later, or maybe next year. Those repeated delays created a psychological trap. At 10 years old, Jahnavi began to feel she was simultaneously too small to matter and too old to ever begin. This loop illustrates how a system of no changes the way a person sees their potential. Constant denial leads to a life of waiting, and eventually the individual stops fighting the external barrier and shrinks their ambition to fit the cage they were born into. That cycle was interrupted when the very environment Jahnavi had been studying spoke back. The local river, a constant murmuring presence, broke her isolation by asking why she was crying. Curious, slightly amused. Notice the river's tactic. It refuses to offer pity. Instead, it audits her existing courage, reminding Jahnavi that a girl who navigates green lizards, hidden snakes, and rattling train bridges is already brave enough for a classroom. The river then delivers a sharp tactical directive. By saying, "It's up to you," the river moves the responsibility of permission away from the family and places it directly in Jahnavi's hands. Real agency begins the second an excluded person stops waiting for a formal invitation. It requires a person to stop asking for a seat and decide to take one. The local schoolhouse was more than a building. It was a physical threshold Jahnavi had been told she couldn't cross. The open door represented a boundary between the life she had and the life her brothers were allowed to lead. Realizing that another verbal request would only result in another year of minding the baby, Jahnavi changed her approach. She stopped talking and started moving. Carrying her sleeping infant brother on her shoulder, she crept quietly through the doorway while the teacher read the lesson. Step by step, she moved closer until she was squatting quietly on the earthen floor in the very back row. This was an act of quiet defiance. By occupying physical space in a room where she wasn't expected, she demonstrated that the only thing keeping her out was a tradition of silence. Arguments against systemic barriers often stall out in conversation. It is the physical, unauthorized presence of the excluded that forces a community to finally stop and confront its own rules. Inevitably, the teacher spotted the new girl holding a baby in the back of the class. In many places, this moment ends with a lecture and an order to leave. But the teacher didn't send her away. He asked for her name, spoke well of her brother, and promised to find a way to make her enrollment official. A single risk signals others to act. Jahnavi's uninvited arrival gave the teacher a reason to use his influence. He applied leverage where she couldn't, negotiating directly with her father, bypassing household hesitations to make a formal case for her education. Individual bravery is the spark that starts the process. But it takes a person with structural power to help turn that spark into a permanent change. The teacher's visit was the turning point. The father agreed, and Jahnavi finally had the one thing she had been denied: the official right to learn. But the true scale of the victory became clear through her mother's confession. She revealed that she too had wanted to go to school as a girl, but had been stopped by her own mother. This chart shows the momentum of history. For generations, the potential of the women in Jahnavi's family had been consistently suppressed, creating a downward trend of missed opportunity. When Jahnavi walked into that classroom, she forced that line to angle upward for the first time. By refusing to wait her turn, Jahnavi didn't just solve her own problem. She cut through a historical pattern of exclusion that had limited the women in her family for decades. With the door finally open, Jahnavi's goals shifted. She vowed that one day she would be the teacher, walking from house to house to bring every girl in the village into the classroom. She was no longer a child crying by the river. She had become a girl with a plan to change how her entire community handled education. The river had promised to tell her about the massive ships that sailed the sea, a world far larger than the bamboo thickets she knew. Now she was finally prepared to understand it. The story of a breakthrough shows us that a single act of courage does more than open a door for one person. It changes the rules for everyone who follows in their footsteps.